All righty, everybody. Welcome to our Austin Energy Green Building Seminar, Universal Design, Accessible, and Adaptive. Slide. All right, before we dive into the webinar, we start with a few announcements of local events, and we'll put the links in the chat now. Slide. SPEAR and CELC are hosting a webinar on Thursday to introduce the Clean Energy Fund of Texas, a national leader in promoting clean energy solutions. Learn about programs that enable communities to access sustainable financing and drive energy efficiency. Get more details and sign up for this event on their website. Slide. This week, the AIA Austin Building Enclosure Council Symposium is hosting Next Gen Building Enclosures. Hear from nationally renowned leaders and local experts in building science. Featured speakers include Joe Stiebrick, Graham Finch, Chris Hardy, and more. They are also having an optional tour and happy hour the day before. Check out their website for details. Slide. AIA Austin and Waterloo Greenway are hosting Freak Show from November 8th to the 17th. This annual event features commissioned site-specific work by Austin-based architects, landscape architects, artists, and designers. As part of its 10th anniversary, the format has been reimagined to honor a decade of high spectacle creativity, innovation, and community. Slide. As we head into the holidays, there are a couple of dates to save for industry events. USGBC is hosting their celebration on December 3rd, and AIA Austin is hosting their annual event on December 11th. Check out their websites for more details. Slide. The end of the year is approaching quickly. If you need free CEUs, check out our e-learning catalog. There are many topics to choose from, and you can learn at your own pace. The direct link is in the chat. Slide. This seminar has been submitted for AIA HSW learning units and GBCI CE hours for lead professionals. This webinar is also eligible for the 1-hour barrier-free design CEU required by the Texas Board of Architectural Examiners. Austin Energy Green Building will provide certificates of completion for self-reporting and reporting AIA hours for all those who attend the webinar. All certificates will be emailed. A follow-up email with links to the recorded webinar and other resources will be sent in a few days. Slide. Here's the AIA quality assurance slide. Slide. These are the learning objectives for our seminar. After watching this seminar, you will be able to design buildings with universal design features, identify examples of barrier-free design strategies to implement, identify applicable regulations for accessible design elements, and use strategies to improve accessibility for all occupants. Slide. If you have any questions during the speaker presentations, use the Q&A window. We have scheduled time at the end of the seminar to get those answered. For any that we don't get to, we'll follow up after the presentation. Slide. Okay, today we'll hear from an industry professional about the significance of accessible buildings and how they contribute to the health, safety, and welfare of the occupants. Our presenter will discuss principles of universal design, the strategies that support accessibility, and the social and economic benefits of creating spaces that everyone can enjoy. Elaine Andersen is a registered accessibility specialist in Texas and a certified national ADA coordinator with over 15 years of experience in accessibility compliance, architectural design, and project management. She has consulted on more than 1,000 projects nationwide, including multifamily housing, education, healthcare, and commercial spaces. Elaine is a sought-after speaker, having presented at major conferences such as the ADA Symposium, AIA, ASLA, and ASCE. She is Vice President of District 1 MUD, an active member of Women in Architecture, and a Navy veteran. Elaine continues to serve through design work with Operation Finally Home and volunteers with Habitat for Humanity. And with that, I will turn it over to Elaine. Thank you very much for being here, Elaine. We really appreciate it. Please take it away.
Thank you, Con. Hello, everybody. I'm going to start sharing my screen. And I think we are good to go. So welcome. Thank you, Con, again for that introduction. I'm glad you guys are all here. We're going to talk about accessibility and universal design today. And as he's already kind of given you the outline of the presentation, we'll just get right into it. Okay. He already has introduced myself. I do have a partner. Her name's Andrea, and we're both accessibility consultants, and our company is Contour Collective.
Oh, Elaine, it looks like we're not able to see your shared screen.
Oh, shoot. Okay. Oh, I forgot to click the one to share. Okay. Okay. Well, you didn't miss much. We're only on the second slide. Okay. Again, this is just me and my partner. We're Contour Collective. Our main focus is accessibility, and we've got over thousands of projects under our belt, from commercial to multifamily to education and hospitals and all kinds of projects you could think of. Okay, so diving into what is accessible design, we're all familiar with the ADA. It is to be compliant with the Act. And here in Texas, we have the TOS, and we will also be talking about that. But the question is, is it usable with someone with a disability? And more importantly, is it inclusive for those with disabilities, but for everybody? And that's what we'll be talking about today with the universal design component. Skipped one. So who are we serving? Those with mobility impairments, wheelchair users, which we're kind of always thinking of. That's why we have the ADA. It's more focused for them, but we also have to be mindful of all the other disabilities, vision loss, hearing loss, cognitive, that can be dementia, Down syndrome, and then the neurodivergent population that we don't think about too much with the ADA. That's going to have your people with autism, even bipolar or anxiety type issues. The bottom line is that this universal design and accessible design benefits everybody, young and old, across the board. And some statistics: there's over 70 million people with a disability. Most of those are the elderly, 65 and plus years of age, and then up to 20% have a neurodivergent disability. And with autism becoming more and more diagnosed, it's a higher population than you may think. Women are more likely to have a disability than men, and then African Americans have the highest rate of disabilities compared to other races. Okay, so diving into the codes, we're going to kind of talk high level and then get down into Texas. And so at the federal level, we have the Americans with Disability Act. It is a civil rights law, so it affects everybody at all times. There are 5 different titles, and we're going to be focused more on titles 2 and 3. Those are in the built environment, removing those architectural barriers. And to meet compliance with those Title 2 and Title 3, you would use the 2010 standards for accessible design. The Texas version of the TOS mirrors these 2010 standards, and so they cannot supersede the federal level at all. But if you say, I comply with ADA, you're probably just meaning this technical standard for Titles 2 and 3. Also, a federal code is the Fair Housing Act. So this deals with multifamily type housing. If you do any affordable housing components or condos or just typical market rate apartments, you would most likely fall under fair housing. It is applicable if you have 4 or more units within a building. Like I said, it could be for sale or for rent. It can be affordable housing, which also triggers even more requirements. If you've ever designed and built one of those, it's a lot more work than what you think. There are some exceptions. Townhomes are exempt, and so that's why we see a lot of townhomes incorporated, just to kind of get away from this exception. So to meet compliance with the fair housing, you can choose up to 1 of 15 codes to comply. The most recent approved safe harbor is the 2018 IBC with the corresponding 2009 ANSI. You'll notice that the 21 or even the 24 IBC and the 17 ANSI is not listed here because it is not approved yet at the federal level. The feds have also said they don't know when, probably not anytime soon, that they will do another approval. So if you're wanting to use the kind of the more latest and greatest stricter IBC, it would have to be the 18 IBC with the 09 ANSI. And then the oldest, kind of the most original code that you could use is the design manual with the 1986 ANSI. It's kind of it is one of the first codes. It is more lenient than the 18 IBC, as you can imagine. But you can choose any up to 15. Okay, so now we're going to get into the state level here in Texas. We have the Texas Architectural Barriers Act. It is the act that governs the construction law. And so this comes into play when you have construction. When you touch a project, it has to comply. And it typically only applies to the project scope. What you touch has to comply is what we like to say. And then there's a primary function that's part of a scoping that we'll get into next. So to comply with the act here in Texas, you would use the 2012 accessible standards, which includes the tech memos that are kind of in the back, the administrative rules, the tech memos and the admin rules get missed a lot, honestly, because they're not in that typical book that you like to reference. And so you have to pay attention also to the memos and the admin rules. So it is enforced by TDLR, the Texas Department of Licensing and Regulation. And if projects are over $50,000 in construction costs, they have to go through the process. They have to be registered with the state. They have to have a review done, an inspection done by a RAS, someone like myself. And then if the project is under $50,000, you don't have to go through the process of the registration, review, and inspection, but it still has to comply. At the end of the day, it is still subject to compliance. There's just nobody doing the checks and balances for you on that. Okay, just want to bring attention to a change that came about. It's kind of it's the newer change. I mean, it did come about 4 years ago during COVID. They put out an admin rule to update some parking regulations. So what is new about it is that you have to provide the words "no parking" and capitalizations in the access aisle. And then there's some requirements here that you can see. And then there's also within the signage that's provided has to have the extra words of violators subject to fine and towing within that signage. So, civil engineers should be very aware of this requirement at this point. It's now 4 years old. But the point is it was an added layer of requirements that they put in as an admin rule. It's easier to add and edit an administrative rule than try to get a code change. And so also without changing the code, they can also release these tech memos, and it's more of a clarification on things. It's like if TDLR has received enough questions about a certain topic, they could issue this tech memo to clarify some of the information. It's never a change in code. It's just, a little bit more information on that topic. The latest one was issued back in 2017, so not much new has been clarified, I'll say. But the very first tech memo was back in 2012, right when it was issued. You'll see that electric vehicle charging station. That one has actually been withdrawn. So you may be aware of that. They have taken away the requirement of 20% of your EV charging stations to be accessible. And what happened was that the attorneys within the state realized that it was superseding the ADA federal level code, and so they said we can't require you to do more. So they have withdrawn it. A lot of people are happy about that, but they are still subject to fuel dispenser requirements in that one of each type of fuel dispenser, i.e. a charger type, has to be compliant. So that would be your reach range, your clear floor space, but it's much more lenient than that 20%, if you were familiar with that. Okay, so with all that, all those tech memos that have been issued throughout the years, that new admin rule on parking is all going to get bundled up. We're getting a new code change. The TOS has been being reworked and updated the last couple of years. It's way behind on the due date, but they do promise us, actually that should say spring of 25, apologies on that. So hopefully in the next, Q1 of 2025, we'll have a new great TOS code. And so that will include, they're going to take all those tech memos that I just showed you and put them where they should go within the code. They're going to take some provisions from ProAg, the best parts that we like, that you can match the road slope. Your sidewalk can match the road slope. They're going to put that into the TOS. They're going to have some information on, trails and picnic tables and camping, things like that. They're going to pull those from the federal outdoor developed area guidelines. And then just some additional clarifications that they've received. So I will say that there's not going to be anything crazy with new, bigger clearances. It's not going to align with the 17 ANSI where it needs a 67 turn space. It's not going to be anything like that, just because remember, it cannot supersede the federal ADA. So it's just going to be really, new and updated and organized better, I'll say. Okay, so that's enough about all the codes from federal level to state level. So we're actually going to get into some examples within the code. And this is the only scoping section that we'll talk about. It's the primary function. If you've done any remodels or alterations within your project, you've probably come across this term, primary function. And so the code says if you alter the primary function, then you might have to do all these other things, scope creep, that you may not have intended on touching or looking at. But what is primary function? So this slide is showing that, the client comes to you as a designer and says, we would like you to remodel our bathroom. Okay, great. That restroom is not the primary function of, we'll say this is an office space. And so just remodeling that restroom, even making it bigger, or whatever you're doing, is not the primary function of the facility. So you can just do whatever you want. Your scope is literally within that bubbled box. So you just make sure that complies. Then while you're in there, the owner says, you know what, we've got all this open space. I would love for you to put 3 more offices within this space. So, well, now you've triggered the primary function of that office building. And so you would have to bring your parking that serves the altered area. So if you had, designated parking spaces that served this tenant space, those would need to be compliant. Your accessible route from those parking to this tenant space would need to be compliant. If there are drinking fountains within the space, those would also have to be compliant. And then it does say a restroom, but you're already touching a restroom, so that's great. Let's say you weren't planning on touching a restroom, you would have to ensure that the restroom that is serving the altered area is brought up to compliance if it's not already. So that might burn you on the back end if you're not contracted to do any of that work, but if the inspector comes in, they're going to inspect for that. And at the end of the day, it's the owner's responsibility for it to comply. So that's the only scoping part we're going to talk about, just to be mindful if you're doing an alteration to be aware of this primary function clause. And it's section 202 in the code book. Okay, so we're going to talk about just kind of ADA TOS, and I'll kind of use them interchangeably because they're the mirrored part of the code. So I'm going to talk like that. And then at the back end, we're going to go into universal design. So this first part is just talking about how the TOS and ADA code, it's for those with disabilities. The intent is to remove the architectural barriers, and some barriers that we're going to talk about could or may include your doorways, obviously steep routes, smaller spaces because they can't turn around as easy, and then what kind of elements would need to be operated with a closed fist and the why. And the big takeaway here is that the TOS and ADA code they're minimums, and they don't work for everybody. So that's kind of why we're going to talk about universal design, how we can do better. Okay, so the first part is accessible routes. The first photo is showing, what looks like it's a wide enough sidewalk. It's pretty flat, which it is. It's compliant. It's at least 36 inches wide. The slopes are compliant. But then we have this tree that's kind of overlapping the route. And so that could be a protruding object. So to be mindful of, it's not just what's in plan, it's this 3D spatial awareness within your accessible route. And the middle photo is showing, obviously it's not the best ground surface material. It needs to be essentially flat with minimal changes in level throughout. So you can only do up to a 1/2 inch if it's beveled. If it's a straight 90-degree corner, it can only be a 1/4 inch change in level. You know, this is just not conducive to those using any type of mobility aid, or even those with cognitive issues. It could be challenging. And it's not very wide either, so that's not good. The third photo, you probably first see those 2 steps, which are painted yellow, which are great. But then there is an adjacent curb ramp. So that's okay, because you've got your accessible route right next to the stairs, the steps, which are the same circulation. You know, the ramp's not way over here and then the steps here. So you want to have your general circulation route adjoining the accessible route if they happen to be different. If there happen to be steps versus the ramp, they do need to be, you know, near each other, visual to each other, not hidden behind a wall. So the code says the general circulation and the accessible route need to be together, essentially. And these 2 site plans are going to kind of illustrate how they're not working. The red lines are actually the short general circulation, you know, the short paths that an able-bodied person would take. And then the green and the yellow, respectively, are the accessible routes. And you can just see by looking at them that they are twice, if not 3 times longer. They are not visually the same. You know, you get to one spot and you see steps, and if you can't immediately look, you know, left, right, and see that that accessible route is there for you, it's not going to work. In this case, the left one, we're going around the building. That's not going to work. And then the right one, it's just sidewalks and paths that are very circuitous that are going to take you definitely way around the way. I will say the first image is just a typical, it could be a TOS ADA type project, it could be a commercial space. But the image on the right is actually a multifamily project. So it's talking about how you have to have accessible routes connecting all buildings to amenities. And definitely the yellow route is not the shortest route. So if you do have to have a longer route, it has to be your slopes are exceeding 5%. So that's your typical sidewalk, is your running slope cannot exceed 5%. But if it needs to, you're going to be into ramp category. So your ramp would be anything over 5% up to 8.3% running slope, which then you'll have to have landings, and those landings also have to be flat with handrails and edge protection. And then the handrail extensions also on both sides. The first image on the left is showing, you know, everything's compliant. You've got your extensions that are going in the ramp direction. They're not turning 90 degrees. You cannot do that. They continue straight in that ramp run direction. There's edge protection. And then the ramp too is adjacent to those steps. So that works. That works great. The middle image is showing it is compliant. I do want to show, and I'm going to try to zoom in just to really drive home the point. The designer did really good because they started the sloping part of the ramp a foot beyond the kind of like general circulation. So you can see here by this concrete joint is where the actual sloping part happens, so that the extensions are not going to stick out into the route. And so that happens all the time. And then the contractor or somebody just thinks it's a better idea to turn those extensions because they don't want them sticking out in, into the way. So, my takeaway here on ramps is to design them a foot inward from the route so you can have your extension kind of protected. And then the image on the right is just showing, in this instance, those slopes would have to be 5% max. Otherwise, they would need those handrails. And so it may not be the safest option, but if the slopes are at 5%, then that's fine. And you can see too that it's also integrated with the steps, so that works really nice. Okay, so the next barrier we're going to talk about are doors. you have to keep in mind of the maneuvering clearance and the slope at those doors. This kind of gets missed a lot as well. And so the first image is from the US Access Board. I'm going to zoom in again. So you can see a person trying to maneuver through that door, and they are very much utilizing that 18 inches on the latch side. That is so that they can operate the door and kind of open it and not be in the way of the door swing. The door's not going to hit them as they're trying to go through the door. So that yellow box is essentially the door maneuvering clearance that we talk about all the time. And that also has to be flat, 2% max, just for safety reasons, right? Someone coming up with a mobility device needs to be flat and safe. They don't want to lose their balance or roll away. So that's why it has to be flat on both sides. The middle image I really like is because it's at a park, as you can see. And, you know, they just did the sidewalk up pretty much the width of that gate, right? And so you would still need that 18 inches on that latch pull side. And you can see how it drives it home. Like that, it's needed, it's used, the grass is worn away. And, you know, I bet you that it's not because wheelchair users are using this gate all the day, every day. It's probably the moms pushing strollers, right? And so that just shows you that that 18 inches is beneficial for everybody. If you're pulling your luggage, if you've got bags on your arms, that extra clearance is so helpful. And the photo on the right is just showing they connected from A to B, right? They just went from this sidewalk up to that door, and that's not going to work as either. So they would need to flatten this out and then probably integrate, you know, a real ramp with the handrails and landings, and obviously a lot more concrete, unfortunately. Okay, so the next one is talking about the width, the thresholds, and the hardwares that could go with that door. This first image is showing that that door width is barely wide enough. Even a 3.0 door that provides the 32 clear minimum is still, it's tight. It's really tight for those wheelchair users, especially if they have bags or something on them. And if they're trying to wheel through with their knuckles outboard of those wheels, that's also a challenge. So, you know, making sure your doors are 3.0 is pretty standard. But to be better at universal design, if you can do a bigger door, that would be great. And so your maximum threshold can only be a 1/2 inch, you know, just for ease of getting through the door, rolling over the door. And then hardware as well, any type of operable part. In this case, it's obviously the door hardware. It could be a window, it could be a locker, or anything that you need to operate has to be operable with a closed fist. So, you know, if you test something and you can do it with a closed fist, then that's good. Cannot require any twisting or pinching or anything like that to operate either. So if you ever have a chance to like test a product, that's how I would recommend testing it. Okay, so moving on to restrooms. As we all know, there's a lot of components within your restroom. Each fixture has their own requirements for height, clearances, and then of course you need a turning space within that restroom. I'll say the takeaway here is with restrooms is that, you know, that imaginary clear floor space box that each fixture requires, the imaginary boxes can overlap. That's fine. But you cannot have a fixture overlap another fixture's required clear floor space. So what that means is this lavatory here cannot be any closer to the toilet and overlap the toilet's clear floor space, right? So if I say I needed 60 inches of clear width here for this toilet, then this lavatory cannot impede that 60 inches here. But, you know, the imaginary dash boxes, they can overlap. That's okay. Like this turning space, this circle here can overlap that toilet, you know, imaginary box clear floor space. So when you're laying out your fixtures and your clearances, you know, I recommend having those clear floor space boxes drawn in your drawing so you can make sure that they can touch, but they cannot the fixture cannot overlap another clearance. Okay, so these are going to talk about some, say, characteristics to think about when you're integrating your things. So knee and toe clearance. is required when you need a forward approach. And so you can see this person using the lavatory. A forward approach is required. So you have the knee height of 27, and then you've got that toe depth as well, so they can pull all the way up, in this case, wash their hands. The middle photo is showing that the knee space looks there, but obviously they missed the toe clearance, so they would have to remove all that. And this also comes into dining and work surfaces that you would need a forward approach to. And so this table, it does have the knee and toe clearance provided, which is great, but that level is showing that it is not 2%. So again, they would have to be able to pull up to that sink or that table or whatnot, and that clear floor space be 2% max for them to be there safely. The next we have protruding objects. This is also a big thing that kind of gets missed sometimes, especially if it's, the owner just comes and sticks something on the wall, right? Especially these AED cabinets or something of that nature. But this first image is kind of funny because the project was just the sidewalk and the curb ramp, the crosswalk and everything, and all that's good, except AT&T came in and dropped their guy wire right over that accessible route. And so now it's a protruding object, and you definitely don't have the vertical clearance of 6'8" throughout there. So they would have to come up and like raise it up straight and then have it cut across the route. So again, it's like not the engineer's fault. The city's going to have to deal with it with the contract, the AT&T or whoever. So anyway, just be mindful of spatialness. It goes all the way up to 6'8", which is the 80-inch vertical clearance requirement. Protruding objects can also come into play on dining tables. We see these a lot, especially at restaurants, bar top corners. These black granite corners right here are definitely protruding objects. They're above that 27 inches, and they're obviously off the wall more than 4 inches. So they would need cane detection. Cane detection is for someone using a cane or any kind of device, and that they don't run into that sharp corner. And so ways to deal with that design wise would be maybe I know in this case it would be a challenge, but like a bar top to do a waterfall edge, or at the end of the day at inspection, how do we address it? We could put columns or posts underneath those counters, or put I like to call them like hockey puck type door stoppers on the ground so that it could be detectable. That's kind of an afterthought if you get busted at inspection. But also just to be mindful in this last photo of what you put on the wall, where you put it. If it's in the general circulation path, it will be subject to protruding object requirements. Reach range. This is another element that we have to think about when we're designing things, where we're putting things on the walls. Those operable parts, they have to be in reach range, right? They go together. So these illustrations are just showing the maximum reach height-wise, and then over an obstruction as well. We're probably all familiar with the maximum reach range of 48 inches here, the first image, and then the lowest is your 15 inches. So if you're doing lockers, you're not going to make the high one. That's not going to work because it's obviously out of range. So it's usually the bottom locker that they make the accessible one. But then they forget to put in a middle shelf, and you think you're just going to utilize the bottom of the locker, but it's below 15 inches. So if you're doing lockers, make sure you have a middle shelf that's above 15 inches. And then if you're reaching over an obstruction, as the middle or second image is showing, that you can only go up to 44 inches. If you're reaching up to over something more than 20 inches in depth, your height maximum is 44 inches. So this would come into play possibly if you're doing a break room or a work surface. If you have outlets or something in the back, 44 inches would be to the top outlet, not the middle of the outlets, the very top outlet. And then the third image is just showing that it's really hard to reach things in the corner, obviously. So it's always at 24 inches kind of sweeping across whatever you're trying to reach. So obviously in those corners, you're not going to be able to reach anything. And then the last image is showing your typical counters. If you do multifamily or break rooms, that you're going to be reaching over the counter to that backsplash to typically reach an outlet or whatnot, that your reach would be 46 to the height. And also to drive home on the reach range, it's, it's if someone's actually all the way up to that 24-inch deep cabinet, that's it. So if you have an appliance that's sticking out more like a refrigerator or a range, your depth is going to be way more than this 24 inches. And so whatever's on this back wall is not going to be reachable. So when you're laying out your floor plans, to be mindful of what somebody would have to reach. Okay, and I think this is the last takeaway of just the ADA TOS code for now, just to be mindful of other things that have requirements. Your assembly spaces, if you do like recreation type facilities, those have requirements, swimming pools, playgrounds, and then there's hotels, nursing homes, correctional facilities also have requirements as well. And you would just utilize kind of the components that we've all talked about so far. Okay, so again, first part was ADA TOS stuff. It's minimal, right? We talked about the barriers and how to remove those barriers, how to design barrier free. And so moving forward, I like this quote. It says, where barrier free design starts, universal design finishes. So we're going to go above and beyond moving forward. It's universal design. If you've not heard of it, I like this too. It says universal design is a concept in which products and environments are designed to be usable by everybody, not those just with disabilities, not those that need a specialized design. And it's not adaptable either. It's that way from the get-go. So it's, universal design is accessible, it's inclusive, it's usable. Again, the takeaway is for everybody here. And there are 7 principles of design. I say they're principles because they're not, set in stone. Universal design is kind of fun in that way that you can be as creative as you want to come up with new ideas and products and, innovative uses of things. And so we'll just kind of briefly go through these. You may have heard of them. I like this poster. It's the original one that the North Carolina State put out. They're kind of the forefeathers of universal design. And so the first one is called equitable use. It's useful and for everybody, really. So this graphic is showing, at a grocery store, how they have the automatic door openers. It's just going to automatically open, right? You don't have to operate anything. You don't have to worry about size, width, or whatever, because they're going to be large and automatic. And so everybody can use them. That benefits everybody. The second one is flexibility in use. Again, it's just for different abilities. And so I like this graphic because it's showing, most scissors are for right-handed people, right? And so, having scissors or whatever that anybody could use, left or right-handed, would be a great innovation for flexibility in use. The third one is simple and intuitive. And so the graphic is showing that like someone's in distress and someone's in need, and that this like emergency call push button is, a kid can use it, right? It's simple, it's easy to do. I will say like the newer AED cabinet, the instructions are really easy. It talks to you, right? It tells you how to do it versus you trying to read and focus. So I think that's a good example of simple and intuitive use. And the next one is perceptible information. It's clear, it's understandable. This example is like maybe, the numbers on a phone are larger. The colors of something would be really good and distinct. So that would be perceptible information. The next one is tolerance for error. This is it's kind of subjective, right? You want to always design safe spaces. But that's kind of the idea here is this is like a nail gun, and if it like shoots kind of funny or whatever, then there's safety thing triggers. So there's low tolerance for error there. And then the next one is low physical effort. Again, this kind of goes into the accessibility realm, is that it needs to be operable easily without a lot of effort. And, you don't want to have to do something and get tired doing it. And then the last one is size and space for approach and use. Just, it's big enough for everybody. It kind of goes with the equitable use example too. A lot of these are kind of interchangeable as well. size and space, it's for all sizes, all ages. Okay, so moving forward, we're just going to do some comparisons of what is ADA compliant, and then what you could do better under universal design. And so for ADA, it's the image on the far right with the blue and red focused playground. So that is an ADA accessible compliant playground. It's got, the transfer system, it's got enough elevated components and whatnot. But unfortunately you have to use a transfer system. So that's like using a lot of physical effort, right? And this mulch, although it's ASTM certified, someone in a wheelchair obviously cannot wheel through that very easily, or if they have mobility, cognitive, it's just not the best, right? But it is ADA compliant. The image on the left is a good UD playground. It is inclusive. All the ground surfaces are, they meet the ASTM ball surface requirements, but, someone can wheel through them. To get up to those elevated components, there's actually a ramp. There's no transfer systems. And then this kind of like whirligig thing in the foreground, it's easily accessed just at ground level, right? There's no big changes in level to access. So this is a good example of a universal design playground. Okay, and then doors. The first top graphic is just showing, the door hardware works. It's probably on a level ground surface. The door would be wide enough, it's fine. It might be physically challenging for people to open the door, especially if you're on crutches. If you've ever had crutches and tried to open a door yourself, it can be challenging. And so, a good UD principle would be to put in automatic door openers. So you can see this person can just easily push the button. You've probably seen them where, this next one is shown, you just kind of wave at it, right? And it'll open automatically. There's ones that you can, it's like one big pilaster and someone could just touch it with their toes to open the door. So that would be a good universal design principle to incorporate if you can. Okay, circulation, just to be mindful of that. The first image is just showing it's all one color. If you have depth perception challenges, this could just all blur. The flooring has a glare on it, so you can kind of see the lights and the flooring can kind of be one. And then the UD image is just showing that the flooring is not reflective. There's not a high glare. The colors are calming. And I'm running out of time, so I'm just going to go kind of faster through here. This one is a learning environment. If you do schools, you can see, like, we all grew up in these classrooms, right, where they just had overwhelming information, overload. It was hard to get kids. Nowadays, it's hard to get them to focus because they're just kind of all over. But, if you could create a learning environment that was maybe more calm or had special areas that were focal points versus like sensory overload within the class. Cafeteria dining, the accessible seating would be they could sit at the end, which is allowable. It has the knee and toe clearance. It's fine. You're still sitting with your friends. But you can see the squares on the flooring and then the circle seats, they're both red. So if you have depth perception and if you just look at this photo quickly, like it kind of blurs together. You don't know what's the seat and what's the tile. And there's no flexibility and options. Like everybody just has to sit on those stools or not, right? And this next image is showing there's flexibility in seating. There's different heights. There's, actual movable chairs. There's benches. The flooring is a neutral color and the pops of color would just be the seats. So it's not too overwhelming. And then lighting and texture, this is kind of I will say no brainer, but it's not, if you don't have a good interiors person, it might not be part of your scope. But the image on the left, it's compliant, right? It's got, it's kind of tight, but it's got the clearances, it's got the right counter heights, it's got, some dining surfaces that are good. But all the colors are essentially kind of the same. They're all kind of this white and gray. You know, the tabletops could blend in with the flooring, could blend in with the wall color. And so that, again, it's kind of with this depth perception. And the lighting, there's no daylighting. If you can always get daylighting in your projects is good. The image on the right, you can see there's lots of daylighting. There's flexible lighting options. The seats are different from the flooring material, from the countertop as well. This one just talks about light, touch, and sound sensitivities, you know, that they create little spaces that people and kids can, you know, have an area of respite. If, you know, you've got a busy hallway, you know, offices or airports or malls or whatever, and just if for someone could like pull over a little bit and rest and, you know, refocus or whatever, is great. This one I really like is just the image on the left. You know, it's like take a minute and look at it because it is very overwhelming color wise. All the lines are like going in the same direction. You've got the flooring, you've got the escalator. They're all these like horizontal type lines. And it can be very overwhelming. And then the two images on the right, they're subtle, there's no glare, it's not overwhelming. So I think those are good examples. Wayfinding. This is very important. You know, signage is just required in TOS and ADA at permanent rooms and spaces. It requires braille, it requires a mounting height, it requires some pictograms, and that's about it, right? And so to go above and beyond would be, I'm going to blow it up here. Like it's called a blade sign. So it's kind of sticking out from the hallway. So as you're going down the hallway, you can look up and see, oh, okay, the restrooms are maybe this way versus like having to get to that point and not know, do I go down this hallway to find the restrooms or whatnot? So wayfinding signage is huge and great and benefits everybody. I like these colors here that, you know, you just follow the red line. And then these kind of flooring and the wall materials kind of go together with really large sign, you know, numbers on the wall here to help as well. Okay, let's see. Okay, yeah, we're almost done. These are just talking about routes to be mindful. You know, both are compliant. This left photo, it doesn't look like it, but, you know, technically if you provide, you know, the right percentage of work surfaces on an accessible route, it works. But it's not inclusive, right? Now, what about all these upper parts? And then this one is just talking about, yeah, in plan, it was designed with the right space, but once, you know, it's at a nursing office in a school. And so once they started putting, you know, their needed furniture, the route was really reduced. Okay, so we have deaf space and vision loss for the next two. So this one is deaf space. To just be mindful if you are designing for spaces that might have deaf people, which could be anywhere, right? To be mindful of like harsh corners, because they, even though you say they can't hear, the vibrations they can feel, and obviously visual is their way of navigating. So if they can see around that corner better and give enough space for them to sign is great. And lastly, vision loss, to incorporate tactile surfaces if you can for cues. And, you know, those that use a cane or have vision loss actually prefer stairs because there's a rhythm. They know what's coming next versus a ramp. They don't, it's harder for them to navigate actually. Okay, so we made it through. Thank you. I know it was really, really fast. But we are now going to open it up for some questions if you have any. I will stop sharing my screen.
Thanks so much, Elaine. That was great. Really appreciate those illustrations and pictures. But yeah, as a reminder for everybody, Q&A box, that's where we're taking questions from. So feel free to pop any in there. I do have one for you, Elaine.
Okay.
Let's see here. So this is regarding that primary function slide you had there in your presentation. So they asked your primary function example. I think you said it was an office space and you are adding more offices. How is that changing the primary function? Is it because it's an increase?
Okay, yeah, no, that's a great question. Well, it's based on the use of the facility. So in my example, we'll say it was an office building and they wanted to add offices. The primary function of that building is for office work. You know, even if you're in a manufacturing type facility and you're gonna alter something in the manufacturing part, you know, it's basically anything in that facility. I'll say what's not triggering primary function. How's that? Your restrooms are not going to trigger. A break room or amenity spaces are also not going to trigger primary function because those are basically extra bonuses for the employee to use. They are not critical of the job function. They don't go there to go to the gym. Maybe they do, right? But like an office building or school or a hospital, you know, pretty much any area that an employee would be the primary function.
Great, thank you. Next question is, do you have any success stories where minimally accessible space was upgraded to universally designed space?
Yes. It's been kind of that's kind of challenging because a lot of people think that to do universal design, it's going to cost a lot more money. It can, of course, it can if you think about it after the fact, if you go in and say, oh, I want to incorporate these things. But if you have, you know, a designer that's aware and, you know, wants to do these things, then they can incorporate them into the design and be better. I have had some schools go through some renovations and kind of we have that discussion. And so they were like, yes, absolutely, we need to do that. So I think that takeaway though for a success story is to just start doing it in your design. And you know, the owner or whoever may just think it's part of the design. You know, you can tell them like, oh, it's because of this. But yeah, at the end of the day, it's if you just incorporate it as part of your design, then you're already winning.
Gotcha, thank you. Another question, how has end user feedback altered accessible and universal design approaches in your experience?
I have seen it in schools. Also, I've experienced it with a deaf landscape architect. Um, we walked through a city and she explained more of the neurotypical aspects of like, you know, the busy sidewalk where people are hustling and bustling, but if you can have a little area for a bench or something for someone to pull over and sit and like maybe get out of all these people trying to hustle and go to work or whatever, that's successful. And you know, when you think about it, you see it done, but you may not realize that that was why it was done, or maybe they didn't realize. But that's kind of the success of knowing and the education behind things. If you understand the why, you're going to be more successful in what you do and how you, you know, propose things to your clients.
Got it, thank you. Next question, what font size is required / recommended for signage?
That's a great question. I have a document that it shows, I will say, okay, as far as font size, it kind of depends on how far away you're going to be viewing things. If your hallway, and I don't know the math behind it all, but you know, the bigger the better is what I would say. And then the font type is also important. So the like the serif font, like Times New Roman, is not a good font to use. You know, Arial would be a good font to use. The more crisp and clean type font is going to be beneficial to everybody. And of course, the color contrast comes into play too. So I would say the bigger, the better that you can is great.
Great, thank you. Let's see if we've got any more here. Okay, this will be the last one, I believe. Are there rules regarding noise for everyone in addition to space for everyone? I'm thinking of spending 30 hours assisting a relative in a hospital, and the waiting room had the TV on all the time. No way to get away from the noise, even in the middle of the night. I was lucky to get lucky to get away from it, but others were stuck in there with the same noise. Same in airports and sometimes even on the plane.
Yeah, I hear you on that. I don't like noisy things either, places. And unfortunately, there's not any rule about that. I would say that's when you kind of need to create those quieter areas for people. And they're being created now. I see them, the sensory rooms, but anybody can use them. Yeah, I don't have anything to say other than, the materials used in the space, to figure out some sound dampening kind of things. So that, yeah, all the noise is not bouncing off those hard, sterile hospital walls. But yeah, there's no rule for that. Sorry.
Got it. Well, thank you very much, Elaine. We really appreciate the great insight and the discussion. And thanks to all our attendees. Please take a moment to complete the survey link placed in the chat. Your feedback is greatly appreciated and helps us plan further webinars. As a reminder, everyone who registered will receive a follow-up email with resource links and a webinar recording. All attendees who joined us for the entire webinar today will receive a continuing education certificate for self-reporting of GBCI CE hours and AICP CM credits. If you provided your AIA number during registration, we'll report your AIA LU for attending this webinar. This webinar is also available or eligible for the 1 hour of barrier-free design CEU required by the TBAE. If you could not attend the entire webinar or want to share it with colleagues, this seminar will be added to our new e-learning platform in about 6 weeks, where you can watch the recording, take a quiz, and earn CEUs as well. Check out the current courses at this link in the chat and log in to get started. Again, thanks y'all. Really appreciate you being here. Thank you, Elaine, for the great presentation. This is going to conclude the webinar.